build a ginormous company or help a lot of people? I know I have. And when I say that, I don't say it lightly because I have Mitzi Purdue here today, and her father founded Sheraton Hotels, and she was married to Frank Purdue from Purdue Chicken. She has an extensive wealth of knowledge, and she definitely has a heart of gold. She started a charity, and she's going to be talking about all of this and more. Author, speaker, CEO, Mitzi Purdue. I'm going to bring her up right after we thank our sponsor. Every business needs a book, including yours. Visit freebusinessbookpublishingcourse.com today to learn the 7 steps to publish and promote your nonfiction lead and profit-generating business book in 8 weeks. Once again, that's freebusinessbookpublishingcourse.com.
Our keynote speaker this evening, Mitzi Purdue.
Mitzi Purdue says it takes a tough man to make a tender chicken.
You know, the house that he lived in and where the company headquarters is, I don't think he moved 5 miles. No, he adored Salisbury and he adored his roots.
I can't recommend Mitzi highly enough. If you want to get a taste of kindness, goodness, and generosity, it still exists in the world. Get to know Mitzi.
And we're also pleased to be joined now by Mitzi Purdue, author of the book, Tough Man, Tender Chicken, Business and Life Lessons from Frank Purdue.
Mitzi, what do you hope readers get out of this book?
I think the whole point of my book, and I'm kind of proud of it, is showing, and I hope even inspiring others, how people can grow and transcend their own limitations.
Hi, I'm Mitchell Levy, global credibility expert, and I interviewed Mitzi Purdue as one of the 500 thought leaders that I folk in terms of credibility. And Mitzi has a lot of that. She's lived a really fulfilling life so far and has done so many amazing things that if you were going to have Mitzi speak at your event, be ready for a human with heart, a human with character, with so many great stories that she will move your audience. I highly recommend her.
When we first married, I, coming from the hospitality industry, it's my impression that you solve everything by hospitality.
Hi friend, my name is Tim Schur. If you are looking for an extraordinary global authority on employee engagement, on building extraordinary cultures, then Mitzi Purdue is the speaker and trainer and consultant for you.
Yeah, his reaction was pretty much what yours was. It was, no, that would be 20,000 people. That's an impossibly large number.
Mitzi is a truly dynamic presenter.
For somebody to be that giving, that real, that authentic, I just can't say enough about Mitzi.
A woman of extraordinary stamina, energy, knowledge, and incredible desire to share that with the world and the people around her.
A leader's job is to give people a better vision of themselves. And if they know that I believe in them, that they're worth putting the first money into refurbishing the hotel, it goes to their place. It helps create the better vision of themselves.
Here she is, ladies and gentlemen, Mitzi Purdue. Mitzi, how are you feeling today?
Stunned, shocked, humbled, amazed. Wow, thank you. Oh,
Yes.
goodness. I mean, I've never seen anything like that before.
So you liked it?
How about, well, it's a little embarrassing to say how much I loved it, but I loved it. I mean, I'll share with you something. I'm 79, and watching that makes me think, maybe it's all worth it.
It is. You have a heart of gold, and I know what you're trying to do and all the people you're trying to help. So I really appreciate that. And don't ever back down from anything you're doing. Like I said prior to this, if there's anyone I can introduce you to, you're doing the right thing and for the right reason. So it's an honor and privilege for me to have you here today.
Well, I feel so honored and privileged. I don't know what to do with myself, but we'll all soldier on.
So I want to ask you about the uniqueness of your background. You know, your father started Sheraton Hotels. You were married to Frank with Purdue Chicken. Tell me about, let's start back when you were a young girl, because what was it like just growing up in that type of family and environment where, you know, you have a standard of excellence and you get into doors that most people don't get into?
Well, first of all, it was fabulous because both father and mother were very big believers in family life. And father used to put enormous amounts of effort into making sure that we children, you know, learned values and that we learned what my mother used to call recipes for living. And just as an example of that, father, you know, he was a captain of industry. He employed 20,000 people. But even so, he would spend every Sunday, there would be what we called family hour. And he would spend it in one way or another, like educating us. It might be something as simple as explaining stocks and bonds, or if he was interested in astronomy, he'd tell us his latest enthusiasms about that. We had something called family band, where there were 5 siblings and mother and father, and would all play something. And this would happen every Sunday. So he put a huge amount of effort into what he called the next generation.
I want to ask you about that because you're just so nonchalantly, you know, he taught us something simple like stocks and bonds and astronomy. I don't think those are pretty simple subjects.
And of
But
course, he would.
I see why it's important to start at a young age, and I'm glad he did. But would you say that's a pretty normal thing to learn?
Well, of course, there's a question of how deep you get into it, but he did want us to be as educated as possible. And one of the things that is perhaps more accessible to everybody is he'd tell stories about his parents or his grandparents. And these were just so important because there's research. There's a woman named Robin Fivish, whom I totally admire, from Emory University, Georgia. And we're talking the state of Georgia. She studies what makes a family high functioning. And by high functioning, you know, the kids are mentally and physically healthy. They like each other. They do well in school. They aren't in trouble with the law. They don't do drugs. So what makes a family high functioning? And her research at the Family Narratives Laboratory says, know your family stories. That there's just a perfect correlation between how well you know your family stories, which is what gives you your identity. Because after all, we are the stories we tell ourselves. She encourages families to do things together, whether meals together or trips together. So I admired my parents no end for, you know, they didn't know that they were doing exactly the right thing, but according to modern research, they were.
I'm so happy to hear that. I don't. What age are you talking about specifically? Are you talking like 7, 8, 9, 10, or in your teens?
From me, it began when, you know, I could barely walk. The instrument I'd play in family band was a recorder, and you know, you can play 1 or 2 notes and sort of keep up with the others. But another thing that he did that I just loved, he did tell the family stories, and I'd love to share one about how Sheraton got started.
Please do.
Thank you. You know, as a little girl, I discovered that I could get parental attention by asking Daddy stories. And so, of course, I asked him all the questions about business that I could think of, because that was just a guaranteed way to get Daddy to pay attention to me. Yeah, with 5 siblings, everybody has their way of doing it. And mine was to ask him questions. So, Daddy, what made you a success? And it was real clear to me that he was a success because, you know, would always stay at presidential suites when we traveled to the 400 hotels. So it's a question that would make sense for a little girl to wonder. And one of the stories he told me was that whenever he'd take over a new hotel, and he started Sheraton in the 1930s, so yeah, there's really tough economic times, and a hotel would usually come up for sale if it was teetering on the edge of bankruptcy. So the day he took possession of a hotel, he'd invite all the hotel workers, and there could be 400 of them. There could be 800 of them, because hotels have lots of employees you don't see. Anyway, he'd invite all of them into the hotel ballroom, and he knew ahead of time that those people were a really demoralized bunch of people, because they're thinking, if I get fired, it's the breadline. Because at the height of the Depression, it's hard for us to imagine, but 25% unemployment. Okay, so he knew that he's facing, let's say, 400 people, every one of them who's probably just as uncomfortable and demoralized as could be. And he knew that. So the first thing he'd do when he's standing up in front of his new employees, he'd say, I want every one of you to keep your job. And I have a reason for that. It's because you know your job better than anybody else in the world. And my job is to give you the resources and the encouragement to show the world just how good you are. And you're going to see in just a few months, this is going to be the most popular, the best served, the most financially sound hotel in the city. And together, we're going to be an example that even though times are tough, that things can turn around. And can you imagine how an employee must feel with that, his welcome to his new job with, or the new owner?
Pretty darn good about themselves, I would imagine.
But that's not the end of his story. He told me, and we're now getting to a part that's more important than the words, although I think the words are certainly important. He said, yeah, that it's a good start to let everybody be assured that they're going to keep their job. But the next part was the following day. The employees would see just hordes of like plumbers and decorators and I don't know, mechanics, whatever it takes to refurbish a hotel. But those people who were upgrading the hotel, refurbishing it, they didn't go to the areas where the paying public would see. No, they're going exactly to the areas where the employees spend most of their time, like the lockers, the showers, the employee dining rooms. And so I asked him, why wouldn't you be spending the first money in the places where you get money back from the paying public? And he said words that really resonated with me to this day. He said, people have a compulsion to live up to or down to your expectations. And he wanted to show them that he really believed in them and how important they were.
That's a great expert authority insight. Do you feel he carried that through with the family life as well as the employees?
Yeah, I think in everything I ever saw him do, the idea that you act and show and demonstrate that you believe in people.
That sounds fantastic.
And there's even a little bit more to that story if you've got the patience for it.
It's not the patience. We got the time, and I want to bring out the best for the expert authority world. I'm enjoying listening myself, but I'm just thinking about that because, for me, there's been so many situations where it's like I'm trying to do the best, and this person here, that person here, whether it's school, family, friends, relatives. When I was starting my business, people are like, just everyone's got their own thoughts on everything, and it's like, wow, it would sure be nice to have it. Here's the right way to do it unequivocally, because I was taught, and I learned about stocks and bonds in my 12, 13, 14, right after I started my first company. I would have loved to learn sooner, but it was, you do this, you see something working, but then everyone cast all this doubt. Then it's like, I don't know. And it's this flip-flop for a while. And I'm glad you're sharing this because while it may not be the norm, it should be the norm. And
well, I think believing in people is a fantastic untapped resource because, did you ever have a teacher say, I believe in you, and it just turned things around?
Yes, some of them.
Well, I think Father somehow tapped into that, but that isn't even the end of the story because, I was asking him, how come you just told everybody that they could keep their job? Why not make them earn it some way? Why do you just give it away free? And his answer was that in his world, there were 3 ways of getting people to do what you want. I mean, I'm sure there are a million others, but in his world. And the first one is intimidation. he said, I could have stood up there in front of everybody and said, shape up or you're fired. He said, you can get people to do what you want with intimidation, but how about it's short term and people do it grudgingly, and basically it's a rotten way. Possibility number 2, bribery. He said, I could have stood up there in front of them and said, do a super job and there's a raise in it for you. Do a super job and there's a bonus in it for you. He said the problem with bribery, again, it's just not a good way of getting people to do what you want, because it's too
may be misplaced.
Yeah, it's too transactional. They're going to work on, well, I guess you said it better than I could. The motivation gets misplaced. You work for the bribe rather than for something bigger. So what's left if bribery and intimidation aren't what he recommended?
A bigger cause?
Yes. His term for it was inspiration. And we're right back to people live up to or down to your expectations. But if you inspire them that they're part of a team, that they're building something that's going to be valuable, not just to themselves, but to their team, to the whole hotel, and eventually to the whole city, then, and the way he put it was, the maid isn't making beds and the bartender isn't just serving drinks. No, they're together building something wonderful and exciting, and you want to come to work because your work is meaningful. And which brings me to another phrase that I copied from him. And maybe it's the most important thing that I can share with anybody. A leader's job is to give people a better vision of themselves. Cool?
I like it. Because most people don't have that vision. I would say most people don't have that vision for themselves, and even the people who do, it's a constant battle to go, to stay in that vision. Because frankly, I could be wrong, but it feels like the world is just out to just bash you down every chance you get, even if you are winning.
Okay, I couldn't agree more. And yet, what I've just been describing from Father, we know it worked, because he started with no employees, he ended with 20,000. And he was famous for people staying with him for life and being motivated and willing to go the extra mile. So his approach of showing people that they were important to him and valuing them, it worked.
It absolutely did.
And he had a number of things that he taught me that might be useful. Like, I mentioned that I often asked Father how he did it. And he had a variety of answers because he wasn't always just going to repeat the same story. But one of them was what he was like as a negotiator. And I get the impression, I've read books on negotiation, that you really try to bargain as hard as you can. But that wasn't his approach. His business approach was be so fair that the other side feels good at the end of the negotiation. And that means seeing the other side. And his view was always leave something on the table. Don't go for the last penny. And I said, why not? And he said, the people who drive the hardest bargains, his term for it was the sharks. They might make the most money on a particular deal. And in quite a few of his deals, he left a lot of money on the table. But he said the payoff for his approach was, one of the things that made Sheraton grow was if a hotel, a nice important one, came on the market, and typically it would come on the market because of maybe the founder died or the widow wants to sell it. In one way or another, there's probably somebody who's not the original owner who's on the other side of the negotiation. And since he had a reputation, which he carefully nurtured, of being somebody who was fair, he said the big payoff for this is he'd always be offered the best deals first. Because if you're a lawyer and you're representing, I'm being hypothetical as all get out. I mean, this is not a real case, but it's a plausible case. An 80-year-old woman, suddenly she's inherited a hotel. Her kids don't want anything to do with it. her lawyer advises her to sell, and she says, okay, take care of it. And the lawyer hunts around and thinks, where am I going to get the best deal? Sheraton.
I like that approach because, you know, you're giving me a reframe now, because a lot of what I've learned on the negotiation and just heard is the typical, you know, you want to be advantageous and maybe not cutthroat, but just you want it in your favor. But if you're tipping the scales, you know, whether it's 20% or 40%, if that's the difference from a shark or not, the net result, like you're saying, is the other person may felt like they got, you know, not the best deal, if you will.
Yeah, so your reputation as a negotiator, you know, since he was in it for his entire life, it was really, really important to him to have a reputation of being, he termed it fair. But he also said, leave things on the table. Don't go for the last penny. That's a really long-term strategy. Short-term, you're not making the most. Long-term, he got the best offers first.
But if you're thinking short-term to begin with, I mean, you might kill it this year, but then you have to redo it next year and the next year. And at some point, and I would say, in my experience, within about 6 to 9 months of, even if you were starting at ground zero right now today, in 6 to 9 months, you have a pretty good foothold no matter what the industry is. After a year, year and a half or two, you can be pretty well known in it. And after that, it's like now the reputation, I mean, it's always important from day one, but, you know, you have to build it up. You're new, whatever. But after that, you know, I have clients that I've had over 10, 11 years. And I appreciate you sharing this because I've always done my best to be fair as well. And you do want to make sure there's enough profit left over. But at the same point, I've always told everyone, I'm like, I'm not going anywhere. You know, I'm always thinking 10 years down the road.
Then I predict great success for you because it's that kind of long-term thinking that does work.
Well, I appreciate that, and I'll definitely take it. Because my main motivation is the more I can do and the more reach I have, the more people I can help with it. So thank you for sharing that with us, because I think so many people are focused on the short game. They're not thinking 2, 3, 5 years down the line. It's, we just need to get by today. And that's, you know, I get it. I've been there. But at the same point, you're just basically in a not even a roller coaster. It's a roller wheel or hamster
wheel. Yeah.
Whatever you call it.
By the way, I don't want to imply that he was into giving away the store. I mean, because he was a shrewd, smart, good. Because he was a shrewd, smart businessman, but he went from no hotels to 400.
Yeah, but it sounds like if he could have got another 10 or 20 or 30% better on the deal, he may have said, hey, this is good, and negotiated it to what's fair and equitable for both parties. But clearly it worked. I mean, there's no refuting it, and it's why I love even reading books, and this is just, you know, a real treat and surreal for me, because I love going back 100, 150 years, going, what were they doing back then before all this fancy stuff came out? And it comes back to just, you know, you're treating people good, and you take care of them, and you actually serve them and over-deliver.
Well, that makes me think of Frank Perdue. Can we talk about my late husband?
We can talk about whatever you want, and I'm excited to talk about Frank and also what you're doing with all of this in your charity, Win This Fight.
Okay, let's go with Frank, because you said a word that just resonated with me, and it's the following: serving.
Serving. Okay.
Because Frank, I mean, I'm going to give an example of where he literally served the people who worked with him. Frank was, as far, and of course I've got a somewhat narrow view on this, but he seemed to have attitudes remarkably like what my father's were. I mean, all the things that I quoted from my father, I saw traces of that kind of thing in my late husband. But I'll give you one thing that happened right after we married. We married in 1988, and we had a very short courtship. When we married, we knew each other in person 6 weeks and 3 days. But that's, I lived in California, he was in Maryland, and would talk on the phone every night for an hour or two for 6 months. So we knew a lot about each other. even though our time in person was limited. But
I would imagine you could even learn more about someone because you're going in depth and you can actually have a conversation because, you know, I know people that meet in person, they go on the dates and everything, but if it's only once a week or once every few weeks for a couple of hours here and there, you know, then all the distractions of everything else, it's like, I think in some ways you could learn about someone better by talking on the phone or conversing.
Oh, good. Well, I love talking about romance. So let's quickly get into that and then get back to business. Yeah, I recommend that because we made a promise to each other, which we actually kept, which would tell the good, the bad, and the ugly. And because we didn't want to make a mistake. And when we actually got married, there was no adjustment period because I really knew. I mean, he had been as honest as I think a person can be with me about his good points and his bad points. And I certainly tried to be the same with him. And it was a miracle. We just meshed. We had 17 years of, for me, joy because we actually did know each other really well by the time we married. But I wanted to share this story about Frank literally serving. When we just gotten back from our honeymoon, and it was, I guess, in late August of 1988. We're walking on a beach in Watch Hill, Rhode Island, and it's really romantic. The beach is pretty much deserted, and we're carrying our sandals, and the surf crashing. And suddenly, I look up at Frank and I say, "Franklin, I think we should entertain every single person who works for the company." And as you can imagine, that took him aback. And his answer was, no, there's 16,000 people who work for the company, this being 1988. That's way too many. And I sort of pretended that I didn't quite process that he was saying no. And I said, I think we should have them 100 at a time. And he said, no, that's way too many. And I said, let's start in 6 weeks. I bet we could put this together by the end of September. And he was saying, no, that's way too soon. And I wanted, since I grew up in the hospitality industry, and I think hospitality solves everything, I wanted to do this. And initially, he was sort of acting as if, who did I marry? What galaxy did she set down from? But as we kept talking, which we did, and we went round and round about this wacko idea of Mitzi's, I could tell that he was starting to think, maybe there's something to it. And after we'd talked, I don't know, maybe half an hour, he said, you know what? I like it. And 6 weeks later, we did begin entertaining people 100 at a time, often 3 times a month for the next 17 years. And what made him change his mind is, like my father, he wanted people to feel important. And what better way to make people feel important, whether you're a trucker, a veterinarian, an administrative assistant, anybody, everyone, than to come to the owner's house and be entertained for dinner. And to my mind, it was spectacularly successful because people would tell me that, it was one of the most meaningful events in their lives to be entertained by Frank in his home. But now the serving part. We had our living room set up with a couple of end-to-end long buffet tables, and Frank Perdue would stand behind with the waiters, and Frank Perdue would wait on his employees. I mean, how many heads of Fortune 500 size companies, A, would invite people into their home, and B, wait on them? Cool?
Probably not a ton, and even fewer for the second part. And you did that for 17 years?
We did. Well, actually, a little less than 17 years because, because by the time he was 85, there were health issues and we couldn't. But up until like 83 or so, yeah. And he loved it because he really, there's a quote that expresses Frank Perdue's feelings, and it comes from a psychologist from 120 years ago. The guy's name was William James. I believe he was a Harvard psychology professor. Don't hold me to that, but I think so. But I do remember the quote very clearly, which is, the deepest principle of human nature is the craving for appreciation. And this was a way for Frank Perdue to show appreciation. And he was just masterful at it, because he'd talk with every single person there. And if he were talking with you, you just felt enveloped by his total focus. I mean, you were the only person in the room for that moment, and you were the most important person in the world to him at that moment. And I made it my business to notice what I'm about to describe. In almost any situation that I ever saw Frank Perdue, it would be 10% him talking, usually asking you questions, and 90% listening. So he made you feel really important. And then at the end of the evening, he'd stand up in front of 100 or so, whatever branch of the company. Maybe it's the auditors, maybe it's the accountants, or the IT people. And he'd give them a state of how the company was doing, what was going wonderfully, what was worrisome, what would keep you up late at night, what would make you think, it's really going great. But he'd just tell them as honestly as if he was addressing the board of directors. And then he'd take questions, and there were always loads and loads. And then at the very end was the part that for me was most meaningful. Frank would always say, but it would be in different words, but it would always boil down to this: I know the company wouldn't be what it is today without you. Thank you.
So he really had that heart for people, and really wanting to not just care for them and make sure they have a good work environment, but I mean, you were bringing them to your home.
Absolutely. And I've been to funerals where the next of kin, I mean, this happened several times, where the next of kin would tell me that one of the most meaningful and important and memorable events of the deceased's life was that he got to have dinner at the big boss's home.
Let me ask you, what was the most memorable party from all of those that you remember?
Well, it's memorable almost in a humorous way, but okay, we all know that I grew up in the hospitality industry, and that in my family, you win points for being warm and welcoming and make people feel good. That's part of the family culture. Well, one day there was a party, and in this case, it was for the sanitation workers. That is, in other words, the garbage collectors, the people who clean up. So this was, the sanitation workers were invited over for dinner. And I thought everything was going swimmingly. People were talking, and they were, there were adult beverages, and people, it's my purpose for them to have fun. It's not to be a stressful evening. But I noticed that there was a couple sort of off to the side, like in a corner of the living room, away from where everybody was sort of boisterously having fun. And it sort of looked, they weren't exactly quarreling, but they were sure as heck discussing something. Well, I'm as a hostess, my spidey sense says, yes, something's not right. What can I do about it?
Did you ask them if you wanted to keep score?
How so?
Did you ask them if they would like you to keep score?
Oh, that would have been great. But here's what I did do. I asked as gently as I could, kind of what was going on. And here was what was going on. This couple, one of them worked for the sanitation department of Purdue, and the guy worked for the Salisbury, which is where the plant was, or where our home was, the Salisbury, Maryland sanitation department. So both members of the couple were in sanitation. But what was going wrong was the guy who worked for the city, he was unhappy because he said, if I try to tell my colleagues that I had dinner at Frank Perdue's house, they'd never, ever, ever believe me. So I thought, oh, there's a solution to that. And so I had a Polaroid camera, this being probably, 25 years ago. But for those who don't remember Polaroids, these are cameras that will instantly develop, or in 60 seconds, develop a picture and print it out. So I had a Polaroid camera nearby, and I walked over to where Frank was, and he was surrounded by a whole group of people asking him questions. But I said, Frank, this is important. leave them for the moment and come over. And I explained the situation to him. Well, he posed with his arm around Russell, and I'm trying to show it. Yeah, he posed with his arm around Russell, and I took a picture. And then, so there's a picture of Russell, the sanitation guy, and Frank Perdue with his arm around him. And then Frank autographs it. "It was so great to have you over for dinner last night, Frank."
That's so cool.
Love it.
Do you still, I want to ask if you still have it, but a Polaroid would only be one shot. Do you have a copy or a scan somewhere?
Oh, I wish I had. I mean, because that is one of my favorite moments, because as you can guess, the couple they looked as happy as people could be, because, now nobody could make fun of him that he was lying. Now here's the proof.
That is special. And not just because you were able to capture it, because it was real. I mean, he would have known, but the fact that he still wanted to do it, because he could have very easily, I'm talking to someone, we're having a party, this and that, but he recognized it for what it was.
Oh, Frank totally got how important that was. I mean, because Frank had a lot of empathy, and I hope I've got some, and that situation is just so clear cut. Here's a problem and we can fix it.
It's one of the reasons I've always liked photography and videography, because one of my original company slogans I came up with, "We can't change the past or predict the future, but we can capture the moment."
Oh, wow. I love that. And by the way, photography is almost my favorite hobby. And if not that, it's videography. So,
because I tell people all the time, no matter what the holiday, what the occasion, hey, I'm going on a trip. Awesome. Hope you have a fun time, safe travels, take lots of pictures and video.
And I'm 79, and those photographs that I've collected over my life, they mean so much to me, like my kids when they were little, or happy times with Frank.
You can't buy those.
Life is about memories, and keep them.
Well, I appreciate you for sharing that. That is special, and I got to be honest, I wish he was still around. Sounds like a lot of fun. The party.
He was just. But something else that he was. I don't want to run out of time, though. Could I read time for another story? Or I could tell it next time.
I have never done this live, but we got plenty of time.
Woo-hoo. All right.
And I don't think anyone even see me look at the thing. We're fine. We're fine. Go, please.
Okay, but just other things that Frank would do and what I'm going to describe now, it's a question of do as I say, not as I do, because I'm going to describe something that I can't do, but I watched him do just all the time. And it's remembering names. And by the way, his son, Jim Perdue, has the same gift. But one of the joys of my life was that I got to see Frank in action. He'd often allow me to accompany him when we would have plant visits. And I'm told that in some companies, it would be just almost unheard of for the big boss to walk along like the assembly line and talk with workers, that generally that it might be more typical. I mean, of course there are exceptions to this, but it would be kind of more typical for a group of the, the executives, the C-suite people, to walk through the plant floor and not talk with anybody, but not Frank. The most amazing thing to me is we could be in a plant where there were 800 people, employees, or maybe even 1,200. And the number of people he knew by name was just staggering. And he'd introduce me to them. And he'd say, I'd like you to meet Delcy, or I'd like you to meet Antonio. Antonia's son just got into a great college, or Delcy's been with us for 30 years and never had a sick day. He'd not just know the names, but he'd know things about them. And how must it feel? Oh, I have to add one other point to this, which is,
go for it.
Well, when we were walking through the plants, I mean, it almost brings tears to my eyes. I'm so impressed by this. But Frank would never give the impression that I'm the big boss, the person who's known throughout the world, Fortune 500 sized company. Never, 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 not even once, because what his real attitude was, we're all part of a team. And I respect your work. And, together we're producing something fabulous. But it wasn't that he was better. It was that they were teammates. And so it was just the most natural thing in the world for him to talk with the people on the line. And then something else that he did that I just treasure, he would, he could have eaten at the fanciest restaurants in the world continuously, but I'd say almost more often than not, he'd eat we would eat in the cafeterias at the plants. And Frank would simply invite people, he'd either sit down next to, there's a table that's nearly full, and he'd just say, is there room for one more? and just talk with people. And he'd ask how their job was going. Were they being treated right? What problems are they up against? Or maybe they'd talk sports. But he was I would describe him as an egalitarian. There was just nothing puffed up about him.
Super down to earth, it sounds like.
Yeah.
When he was touring the plants, would he always stick to the schedule, or when he got caught up talking to someone, would he just let it go?
He'd let it go. Frank had a different relationship with time from anybody I've ever known, because when there was an appointment, he would be there to the second. So he was terribly conscious of time in many cases, but going through a plant, no, if somebody had something to say, he'd just stay and listen.
That's fantastic.
And by the way, I once worked in a plant.
Oh, you did? Tell me about that.
Well, one day, I was driving from Norfolk, Virginia to Salisbury, Maryland, and our Accomack plant, which is sort of like halfway between the two cities that I just described, I was hungry, and it'd be a couple of hours more before I'd be home. So I stopped off at the plant and ate in the cafeteria. Yeah, which I love doing, because plants, they can be kind of fun and you meet really interesting people. But in this case, I was sitting beside an African-American woman, and she was just really curious about my life and what life with Frank was like. And I had no trouble spilling the beans. But then I thought, she's asked me all these personal questions, turnabout's fair play, and I wanted to know about her life. I wanted to know, everything that I could find out, because you don't know this about me, but I'm a writer. I spent most of my life writing newspaper columns. So, here I am talking with her, and she's describing her job, and her job is in the plant. It's what I would have predicted would be like a really boring job. It's when there are chickens that are going to be cut up so that you get like drumsticks and breasts and so forth, you put them in shackles. And what that means is there are these, I'm not good at describing it, but you hang the chickens in these sort of like clips. Okay. And I was thinking, and by the way, I knew that she'd been there for like 10 or 12 years. And I wanted to find out if that job was boring. And I didn't use those words because that's not a polite question to ask. But would you have the same curiosity? What's it like?
It would be interesting to know.
Yeah. And trust me, I didn't say, is it boring? But I sort of indirectly wanted to find out what it was like. And she said, I can't describe it. I just can't. But if you'd come work with me for a day, then you'll understand. And I said, well, if you can arrange it, I'll do it. And so the next week she had talked with her supervisor, had talked to the plant manager, and probably got all the way up to Frank, I don't know. But a week later, there I am, Mrs. Frank Perdue, putting on the white smock and the hairnet and the bump cap in case you bump into something. And something else you have to do if you work in a plant, you have to take off all your jewelry and all your earrings because you don't want them to fall into food. So anyway, there I am, and I'm standing beside her trying to hang chickens, and I really suck at it. I couldn't do it. I mean, I didn't have the coordination, but I did discover what it was like because I did spend 8 hours there. And what I discovered was that actually it wasn't a bit boring. Well, first of all, because I was trying to do something that I never did get it right. And everybody was laughing at me, but that's okay because so what? But what I learned is, here's what we talked about. We talked about what, let's see, what various movie stars were up to. We talked about television shows. We talked about, what a grandchild was doing. It was just sort of like an endless, I'm not going to say party, and gossip session doesn't sound quite right, but at every moment there was just talk that was really interesting. So, and I asked my new friend, this seems like a really, really compatible group. And she said they put an enormous amount of effort into having people in groups who will like each other, who will have sort of the same attitudes. And that's one of the big efforts that you have in a plant, to have people who are congenial working together. And I loved it. And I was the butt of a lot of joking, because since I couldn't get it right, and my chicken has gone by and somebody else has to hang it for me, and which they did with no trouble at all. And finally, one guy, I couldn't get one foot using both hands, and a guy I was standing beside was, eventually sort of putting his chickens and my chickens, just with incredible skill. It's as if he was tossing them in like a basketball almost. And so I ended up with a lot of appreciation for the skill that these jobs have.
Well, I can imagine, because the belts are going by, I'm sure, at a certain speed, and from a business standpoint, you don't want it to be super slow. You want it to be productive, and efficient, but at the same time, it's got to be enough where people can catch it. So I
heard from one person later that I didn't need to feel bad, that I was just absolutely flunking, because he said they all went through it. It's sort of like if I asked you to type a paper and you'd never used a typewriter before, or a keyboard. It'd take you a long time, but then once you've done it 500 times, it becomes really quite easy.
It's that experience.
You just learn.
It's interesting you bring up typing, because English is probably one of the biggest things I've overcame, because I failed English 7 times. So writing my first...
I'd never guess.
Well, thank you. My first book was a real mountain to climb, and then the second one was easier, 3rd, 4th, 5th. And it's been a lot of fun. Doesn't hurt that I've been helping people publish business books for the last nearly decade. But I when you were saying that, I was like, yeah, I've done real bad at a lot of stuff before too. But if you believe in it, even launching the show, I had no clue what I was doing. On the audio side, the video side, I was beyond confident, and those are the saving grace. But I wanted to ask you about that, because I can't imagine you being bad at it. Do you think it strictly was just because you'd only done it a few hours?
I'm a little bit.
Do you think 3 or 5 days later, a week later, you would have had the flow of it down more?
Yeah, I think I would have. But then I'm dyslexic, and I reverse B's and D's. And so I was a little bit of a disadvantage anyway. But so what?
You went for it, though.
Yeah. I wasn't
no need to. But the fact that you had that insatiable curiosity to find out.
Well, I felt it at the end of it that I had made friends. It was, I liked every one of them. And I guess when you're laughing, and I hope what I'm about to say about myself is true. I don't have to be perfect. It doesn't bother me a bit not to be. And the laughing was good natured. So I thought it was bonding.
I agree. So I have one more question regarding this, and then we're going to go to the wheel of whatever. And I want to ask you, the people you made friends with, were they at your house before or after this? Because I'm sure
it would have been after.
Come to one of the party. Okay, after?
Yeah, it would have been after, because this was fairly early on.
Okay. So how did that go? Were you guys talking about it? Was it the whole group when they were there? Because you were saying groups of 100. Was it the core group that you had worked with?
No, it would have been 100. And I would have probably said something, "Oh, I'm so happy to see you again. Remember that day?" But then as a hostess, I'm supposed to pay attention to everybody. I can't just go off in a huddle with
Okay.
my new best friends. But it was an odd experience because from being somebody, we're back in the factory again, from being somebody hopelessly incompetent, I was worth exactly what I was being paid, which is nothing. But then at the end of it, at the end of the 8 hours, everybody wants to have their photograph taken with me. And I bet, actually in the whole plant, so I bet that there were hundreds of people. And so suddenly, I get to be really important after being at the absolute bottom. It was a fun day.
Turn that around. That must have been a lot of Polaroids.
Well, I guess, I don't know why they all had cameras. Maybe they knew I was coming. I don't know. I never examined that. But
have you ever seen the show Undercover Millionaire?
I'm
Undercover Boss?
I'm deeply aware of it, and I've seen segments from it. But this wasn't undercover. They knew who I was.
Yeah, it's just remind me a little bit of that because I knew you did it, and you had flat out told everyone, and it came from your friend you met in the cafeteria. And I think that would be interesting too. I'll do it if you can set it up. I remember you saying that, and she has to ask her supervisor who has to do this, and I can imagine you and Frank having dinner. Just, oh yeah, by the way, you're going to be starting Monday, or however that would have panned out. That'd be interesting.
Well, he absolutely loved it. I mean, because as I mentioned, he's an egalitarian. No one person is more important than another person, and I think, my impression was that he was deeply proud of me. I think I won 1 million points with my dear husband that I wanted to.
I can imagine. So here's what we're going to do, because Expert Authority World, we're doing a 2-parter here, and I'm excited about this. I'm going to do the Wheel of Whatever. And Mitzi, I'm also telling you, because normally I do the Wheel of Whatever, we do a sponsorship, and then we come back for the imperfect action round. And I've been debating, should I ask you those now? No, I'm going to save it for the end of the second half. So I'm going to do the Wheel of Whatever, and we're going to come back for the second half, and then we'll finish the show normal. So here it is. So I was laughing earlier when you were talking about being on the hamster wheel, because I'll give you one hint what this thing is.
Does it begin with H and the next word is W? Or it looks more like some kind of photography thing.
No, it's real. It's in my hand. I just spun it.
Okay, what is it?
It's a hamster wheel.
Oh, it really is literally a hamster wheel. All right.
Well, for Expert Authority World, it's the Wheel of Whatever.
Okay, I'm up for it.
That I painted yellow and black. So,
yay.
What was your question? Yeah. Treasure Island. Woo!
Yikes.
You're on Treasure Island. You lose everything. You have to start over again.
And?
You have $1,000. What would you do in the next 30 days to get it all back?
I'd study. And let's see, quoting my late father, he used to say, money that you spend on education or tools is always wisely spent, assuming you use the tools. So I'm on Treasure Island. I've got $1,000 and I can buy stuff. I think the first thing I'd do would get some kind of iPad and get internet connection, and then I'd take courses right and left.
Okay, so you're saying education is the highest resource.
Education coupled with tools, because my tool is the iPad, and the education is the courses that I could take on.
Okay. And I'm going to reiterate this because I don't even think it made sense to me. And I don't know why I called it Treasure Island, because if you were stranded on an island, it sure as heck wouldn't be treasure. You're on an island, you get off the island, you have $1,000 to turn everything around.
So I've got to give a different answer?
No, you don't need to. But when you said I'm on Treasure Island with $1,000, I'm like,
oh yeah.
That's a stupid name, and there's nothing to buy. So that's on me, but that's the whole point of this. This is a fun little area, but you're saying education is the greatest resource.
I do, yeah. Okay.
Excellent. Well, I like it. I'm not disagreeing, but thank you.
Well, can I turn it around? Is it illegal to ask you what you'd do?
Holy smokes, no one's ever done this. Still recording.
Oh, bad Missy. Bad Mitzi.
No, you can turn it around. We'll throw an audible. So here, I'll spin it again. Okay. Tell me when to stop.
Stop at Treasure Island.
Is that the yellow or black one?
Let's go with black.
Okay. Ooh, matches my hair. So what would I do?
Yeah. It's a toughie.
It's so much easier to spin that thing and just ask.
Well, you could copy me. I mean, I gave a brilliant answer, right?
I would think of all the people I've helped and people I know that are influencers and see what would be the need of, we didn't put a point in time in this, so this could be in the past and the future. I would find a need, help people with it, and reach out to all the people I already know that I've done stuff with that I know could help expedite it. Because you could spend 5 or 10 years going from zero to where you're at, but I think all the relational capital would expedite it tremendously. The 1,000 would be towards, if I could get internet and even without internet, if I could get my phone, it's what I started with. I mean, all you need is the right people, the right hearts, and the right connections. The rest just makes it, we'll say, if this will speed it up 3 to 5 years, that might speed it up a couple of months. It's just a convenience factor, but Sheraton hotels didn't have internet. They clearly were successful.
And Father started, the title of his book was How $1,000 Became $400 Million.
Oh, that's a great title. I mean, when I started off, I had barely anything. There's many times I overdrafted stuff just to get by another 30 days, to that point with the training. And I remember when I took $20 over a decade ago and turned it into 20,000. So yeah, I believe in that education for sure, but also the relationships. I could rebuild all of this in probably 6 months, what's taken me the last 2 to 3 years.
And that reminds me of something that Frank used to say. He used to quote the great Carnegie. It's not Dale Carnegie. Andrew Carnegie. Andrew Carnegie. Andrew Carnegie used to say, take away my plants and leave the people, and I could come back better than ever before. Take away my people and leave the plants, and pretty soon grass will grow on the plant floors.
Yeah.
So Frank would have loved your answer.
Well,
I love it. Can we erase the tape? And I want to take your answer because it's a better one.
Yeah, I don't know if it's better. I've never asked anyone that. And normally I say, who is someone famous you'd like to do business with, this and that? And I'm like, what do I ask you? Because you are someone famous and you know these people. And I'm like, she's probably been working with them 20 years. That's not even a stretch. That's like normal every day for you. I'm like, oh, I got this one. So,
but I love the question. I mean, it really made me think.
Made me think.
And I would like to revise and extend my remarks and say, that it's the relationships. But I still think that education and tools are
for sure.
I'd put some of the $1,000 into that.
Yeah, I agree, and I forgot for a second I'm hosting. I thought it was tomorrow when I'm doing going on other shows. That was a lot of fun. Thank you for I've never asked that, and no one has ever done that to me. So I don't know if I hope it's a trend, but I enjoyed it for right now today.
And I'm thinking, bad Mitzi, bad guest.
No, you're a blast. So here's what we're gonna do. Two-parter. So, we still got plenty of time. Perfect. We are awesome. So here's what we're gonna do. Mitzi and Expert Authority World. We're going to thank the sponsor, and I'm gonna come back, and we're just gonna roll into part 2. Sound good?
Sounds good.
What's that sports terminology like? 10-10
double hitter.
10-10 all. Yeah, double hitter, but a 10.
A double hitter was what I mean, baseball's the sport that I know a little bit about.
I like hockey. I like playing hockey. I don't know what the term is, but we're going to come back with even more fun, and we're having a blast. So can you cue that sponsor? Okay. You're already the expert, but have you transformed your expertise into a tangible asset that will generate and qualify leads while increasing profit for you 24/7? And if so, how well are you promoting it? With the Expert Authority Effect publishing method, it's easier and faster than ever. Visit freebusinessbookpublishingcourse.com today to learn the 7 steps to publish and promote your nonfiction lead and profit-generating business book in 8 weeks. Visit freebusinessbookpublishingcourse.com to get started now. Once again, that's freebusinessbookpublishingcourse.com. And we are back with part 2. And Mitzi, I know you're still there, so I'm going to go and say that I was just joking. No one was queuing that up. It's all me. But for anyone that's just, let's clap this a few more times. We're coming in for part 2. Steve and Nick, you got that? We got part 2. Mitzi Purdue here. And you have just been sharing so much great stuff with part 1. So let's just continue on the story and, yeah, I'll say it. For anyone listening to this, go back and listen to part 1. But real quick recap, we have Mitzi Purdue here, and she's just a gem. Listen to part 1, and this will make more sense. So, Mitzi, thank you for that, because normally I have to do those after the fact, but you're just such a breeze to be interviewing. I want to say thank you to you.
Oh, it's my joy to be with you. I'm loving this.
I'm having a lot of fun, too. So let's just continue on the story you've been sharing. You were telling us about your dad who started Sheraton Hotels and your late husband, Frank, owner of Purdue Chicken. So all of this is coming together, and I see that you have this standard of excellence throughout all of it. Where has it brought you current day?
Current day, I expect to spend the rest of my time on Earth combating human trafficking. And I began being interested in it. Well, there was an hour that changed my life, and it was April 11th of 2019, probably around 2:00. And I heard a speaker talk about human trafficking. And up until that point in my life, the word human trafficking, they were just words that would sort of glide on by. I didn't really relate to them. But in this case, the speaker showed pictures of little girls. They were 10 to 12 years old. I'm going to guess there might have been a dozen of them, who had been sex trafficked. And these little girls were forced to have sex with strangers 10 or 12 times a night. And, it had been going on for years. So imagine a little girl being raped 3,000 times in the course of a year. And I could see like the fear and the despair on their faces, and I couldn't unsee it. And so I'm thinking, I want to do something about this. And all right, I'm sitting in the audience, and the lecturer is telling about what it costs to marshal the forces together to come and rescue sex trafficked children. And I'm thinking, I want to write a great big check and do something about this. But then as I'm sitting in the audience, I'm thinking, but if I write a great big check to this organization, it's going to be cutting back on other organizations that I'm really deeply committed to, like, for example, the food bank. I mean, I really care about the food bank, the local food bank, and to some extent, national food banks. And I'm thinking, I'm running through every cause that I care about and that I've contributed to, and I can't think of any that I want to cut back on. And so my mind is just bouncing back and forth, cut back on this one, cut back on this one. And then I had an idea. I inherited from my late parents a desk that we think is about 400 years old. It belonged to, we think, a de' Medici cardinal. And I know that because it's historically valuable and it's a beautiful piece, and because it was owned by the founder of the Sheraton Hotel Company, that if it was put up for auction, you'd probably raise a lot of money and a lot of awareness at the same time. And yeah, I was really fond of this desk, but I'm thinking I could have this desk, or maybe I could save several dozen children. And which would I rather have, this object or the chance to save children from what to me sounds like a fate worse than death? Because when a child is trafficked, there's not only her suffering, but imagine the suffering of, and it could be a boy, of the child's family. I mean, it's just this, I think it's the most despicable, awful thing in the world. And it's not just one or two kids, according to the United Nations. There's probably 1 million children who are being sex trafficked right now. There are 8 million human beings that are being sex trafficked. And there's 40 million who are slave labor total. So I want to do something about it. So yes, of course I'd sell this chest and give the money to help rescue sex trafficked children. But then I had an idea. If I felt that way, that I don't have a lot of money that's not already spoken for, that I don't have money that if I support a new cause, I don't have to cut back another. But what if I sold tangible property and turned it into cash? Might there be other people who would feel exactly the same way, that they don't have loose cash floating around, but they do have like jewelry or paintings that they would be willing to, if somebody could make it easy for them to convert it into cash, that they'd give it to the anti-trafficking organization of their choice. And it turns out that lots of people do feel that way. And I went to one of the major auction houses in New York, and I can't say their name because they're giving me a special deal that they're not going to give all their clients. But they said if I could create one great big huge auction with very high-end objects, that they, because they hate trafficking, would be willing to forego their 20% commission. And it was getting really exciting with some of the most amazing gifts you've ever heard of. Like, well, let's say a diamond and sapphire necklace that belonged to Marlene Dietrich, appraised at $1 million. A ruby, I've been spending before COVID-19 struck, I'd been spending my time going around the world collecting amazing donations. And the biggest one was from a jeweler in Taipei, Taiwan, who gave me a ruby a little bit smaller than a golf ball. And it's a perfect ruby. And here I am holding this, if you've never, the thing weighs 69.7 carats, and it belonged to a Qing dynasty emperor. And when that thing is put up for auction, it's going to bring millions and millions and millions, all of which can go to anti-trafficking. However, COVID-19 put all of this on hold because the auction house doesn't want to have an auction where people are worried about the economy and what's going to happen next. And you have to plan these things probably close to a year in advance. So the auction house wants to wait till COVID-19 is behind us. So that's on hold. So what do we do instead?
Find a way.
There's a way that, it almost might turn into something better. Because the auction, it's my dearest hope in life almost that this will take place, because I think we're on track to raising $100 million. And that could make a dent in human trafficking. And where it would go be the donor would always get to choose where their yacht or their hotel or their antique car collection, they say where their tangible property goes, and the auction house converts it into cash, and then an anti-trafficking organization that the donor chooses is the recipient. So the plan is good, but I didn't expect COVID-19. But instead, I've made friends with some people it's called the International Fraud Group, and it's made up of individuals in 50 different countries well, 47, that their specialty is attacking criminal fraud. They haven't up until this year been involved in human trafficking. But here's the idea that I'm just so involved in now. And anybody who's listening who wants to know more details about it or who would like to be involved, can they text WTF to 51555? And by the way, if you're a little shocked by WTF, yeah, I do know what it means. There's a fellow who's a neuromarketer who said, that's perfect, because the initials of win this fight are WTF, and it's memorable. So I'm going to predict that anybody who wants to contact me by texting WTF to 51555, they won't have any trouble remembering the initials.
Probably not.
Probably not, but that's as deliberate as you can possibly imagine.
So what is your goal? Are you looking for more donors, or are you looking for more volunteers? Both?
Well, at the moment, I'm looking for people just to sign up and be part of my blog, because I write a blog once a week on different anti-trafficking efforts. But let me share with you briefly, if I can.
Please.
Okay, what I would like people to sort of have a ringside seat on watching how this unfolds. And to explain it, I have to go back probably 15 or 20 years to a problem that one of the larger software companies had, because it's a problem that's very like human trafficking. And I'll explain the connection in a second, but let me tell you the software problem. There were pirates who were making millions and millions and millions of dollars all over the globe off of pirating software. And the software company, they could find traffickers and put them in jail, but it was so lucrative that the moment they put one in jail, somebody else took his place. Until the International Fraud Group came up with the idea of, it would be nice to put them in jail, but what really stops them is find where they bank and trace with just incredible precision, which they have the ability to do. I mean, it's dark web and artificial intelligence and covert operations, and one way or another, they can trace where the pirates, the software counterfeiters, were banking. And they just like sneak up, go to the bank and say, hey, we can prove that this is hot money and it really belongs to the software company. The banks would freeze the account. The software company would seize the stolen money, and the software company was making $30 for every $1 they spent on the people who were shutting down the traffickers. So it was very worthwhile for the software company. But what happened in a really pretty short time, I'm thinking like maybe a year or so, it became so unprofitable for the traffickers, for the software counterfeiters, that they effectively were shut down. Because just, this is really improbable, but for the moment, imagine that you're a software counterfeiter and you've spent so much time and effort counterfeiting this stuff, and then you go to the bank for your millions of dollars and it's frozen and it went right back to the software company. It just destroys your motivation. You're in it to make money, and the International Fraud Group members were just able to keep the counterfeiters from getting their money. It worked beautifully. Well, how does this relate to human trafficking? Well, human trafficking is a $150 billion a year industry. And one trafficker in New York can make $1 million a year just off of 4 girls. So they're in it for the money. What if we could interrupt their money flow? And
we should, because it's a horrible, disgusting thing. And no matter if it's, people look at all these world issues and I think they get confused because they think it's this big thing that no one can combat, or this, that, the other thing. And whether it's business, criminal activity, sick stuff like this, people are people. You got motivation, you got demotivation, you got, I'm doing this for profit or a bigger cause, or, there's always a reason behind it. When you can kill that reason, for whether it's good, bad, or indifferent, I mean, killing communications and the money supply, that pretty much is a large 80+% of anything.
Yes. And I mean, we truly do know the motivation of the traffickers. I mean, there are some who may have a different motivation, but how about the overwhelming motivation for the traffickers is money. And if we can cut off their money, their motivation is gone. I mean, some are just SOBs and want to make people miserable, but I think money is the motivation. And there exists the ability to cut it off. But why hasn't it been done so far? Well, in the case of local law enforcement, they don't have a great big budget to devote to this. And they may not even have the know-how. I mean, the big cities like New York would certainly have it, but trafficking is everywhere. And the local police departments, they're so busy dealing with local stuff, rapes, murders, arson. Where do they don't have the ability to, they don't have the resources to go after an international crime like this. So what I'm hoping to do, and anybody who has any suggestions for helping me with this goal, the International Fraud Group could make a difference, but I can't ask them to do it for free. I mean, supposing you're just a rock star in this, and we want the rock stars, you may be making $250,000 a year, and you probably have a mortgage and kids to put through college. You can't do it for free. So my goal is to get to one of the really big funders, like maybe the Gates Foundation, maybe the Ford Foundation, or maybe Jeff Bezos, or just people who have money where $10 million wouldn't be an extraordinary amount for them. If they could fund this, I think that we could make an extraordinary dent in human suffering. There will be children who won't be trafficked and who can grow up to be all they can be. There will be families that just aren't torn apart with grief that never ends. This is something where we could change the world, but it's going to take money, and I'd love advice from anybody.
Yeah, and a lot of the right people too, because, unfortunately, this is something somewhat close to my heart, because, I mean, it's close. It was never me or anyone in my immediate family, but I have friends, and I've had people on the show that this is their case. And I think it's a horrible thing. There's a ministry, Mercy Multiplied, who takes care of girls from after the fact who got out of it, and that's one I've supported for ages, and I think it's fantastic. But I love that you're talking about this, because it's preventing it before it gets to that point, as well as, I was happy that my church was doing something locally in the Detroit area where actually the FBI came into the church. And I had a lot of speeding tickets when I was in my young teens and stuff. So I was going to be a police officer at one point, but still I was like looking over at the FBI, just like, I don't know why I'm freaked out, but it's kind of cool that they're here. But joking aside, there's a lot of good people who want to do stuff like this, and I think it's fantastic that you're doing it, because when I heard about it, I was like, absolutely, let's talk about it. And again, to what I said about Treasure Island, why did I call it that? That makes no sense. The people that will see this and hear this, and the ones I'm going to reach out to, there's the ripple effect of, well, it's not just me and you, it's who do you know? Who do I know? Who do they know? And I think what you're talking about, the small towns and stuff, unfortunately, this is just, it's not that people don't want to help, it's a budgetary thing.
Yeah, I mean, you tell me a police department that has excess money to throw around, they don't exist. They are stretched thin.
And if you've got 19 problems in County A versus County B, you can slip under the radar just because one of the things I really have always wanted to help people. I wanted to be FBI, CIA, lawyer, attorney, police officer. So it's funny when people are like, oh, you're going to get caught. They'll run a DNA test. They see CSI and all these shows, and it's Chicago PD. It's like, do you know how much DNA tests are? Do you really think they're going to bust out this entire team of people to find your lost car? I mean, depending on the situation, but the reality is it's not how it works. It makes for good TV and movies and everything, but the real reality is there's plenty of good people out there, and the more we get in touch with them and the more we do this, everybody, I love this quote. It was by someone smarter than me. Everybody is somebody's someone.
And I like Martin Luther King's "We can all be great because we can all serve," which brings me back to texting that memorable phrase, WTF, which, by the way, I really think is an appropriate response to the horror of okay, so text WTF to 51555. I would like people to do that because the larger the list that I have, the more clout I have when I go calling on, I mean, I'm being hypothetical. I'm not expecting this to happen, but it could, calling on Mr. Bezos. Yeah, it'd be neat. And then I'm also creating a TED Talk, and I'd love to direct people when I do the TED Talk. The more hits I get, the better. But most of all, what's in it for them? I think for somebody who signs up for my blog, you're going to learn. I don't write dark stuff. I write about good people who are fighting this. And they're fabulous stories. They're people who've recovered. They're people who are helping people recover. They're people who help rescue. There's prevention. And the biggest prevention will be when we can make people less vulnerable. But I can also share things about how to tell if it's going on. Or what if you see trafficking, what do you do? And I'll tell you right off what to do. Don't try to interfere, because you may put the person who's being trafficked in danger.
In spot.
Yeah, I mean, that's if you see something, don't reveal that you've seen it, but get every detail that you possibly can, such as when, where, what time, what does he look like, what does she look like, and then tell the police, tell 911 if it's something imminent, but leave it to law enforcement or people who know what they're doing to effect the rescue, because I mean, people get killed when people who don't know what they're doing try to do a rescue.
Well, yeah, to the point of what you were saying when you were working on the assembly line with the chickens and everything, if you don't have the experience, it's not that you can't do it. It's just that unless you have military training prior and you're now a veteran, first off, thank you for your service. But two, yeah, the common everyday folk is not equipped to take down hardened criminals.
Yeah, and then one of the things that traffickers do is they take it out on their victims. I mean, I'm just thinking of should I tell this? Yeah, I started of a case that a detective in the New York Police Department, I'm not sure if I've got his title right, but this guy told me about a woman who had tried to escape because there was somebody who had promised her that she could escape, but her trafficker got to her first, chased her down, reached for a glass bottle of beer, and so he's holding her in, his arm against his chest, and he smashes the bottle of beer and slashes her face from her ear to her chin. And the policeman, the law enforcement officer, visits this woman in the hospital, and she's had 32 stitches, and he wants to find out who did this to her. She's so scared that she won't talk with him. And when she leaves the hospital, she goes back to her trafficker because she's that scared. So, this isn't something for civilians to mess with.
Yeah, there's definitely psychological issues with that too, and PTSD, and I've heard, unfortunately, about that where they're free, and even unfortunately sometimes even after rehab 6-12 months. I mean, people don't realize how deep it can go on an emotional level and psychological level and all of that.
Well, my impression, and I can't know that I'm right, but this is when I heard this story, my impression is this woman was so terrified. She had looked death in the face, and she didn't want this guy mad at her again.
Yeah,
but there's probably.
But I'm glad that you're spearheading this, because And tell everyone the website.
The website is winthisfight.org.
Thank you. And what's great about it is, again, there's resources now, and they're doing great stuff. But this is for after the fact, when you can cut it off at the head to begin with. You know, I don't think any of them would be upset if there was no longer a need. You know, I believe they would just transition to continuing to, you know, cut it off at the head here.
All right, my expectation to answer the question is, there's $150 billion at stake. That money, I mean, I don't know that this, well, okay, we want to drain it. We want to, you know, the term is freeze, seize, and squeeze. You freeze the bank accounts, but where does that bank money go? And I don't know at this point where it will go, but I'll tell you what my deepest hope is, that it goes right to anti-trafficking organizations. Because the aftercare, I mean, supposing miracle that 3 to 5 years from now that the traffickers got shut down the same way the software counterfeiters got shut down. And it's not impossible. It'll take a lot of fine tuning, and I don't want to promise more than will happen, but the possibility is real. So imagine that trafficking, instead of 40 million people, that it's just cut way down to, well, far less than it is now. And I think that's realistic. There will still be people who will need aftercare. There will be people who will need education, job training. I mean, there's no lack of need for the existing organizations. And my prayer is that some of the evil money would get funneled to the anti-trafficking organizations.
I believe it's 100% possible. And it's not that you're overpromising anything. You're painting the vision of what you want to see happen.
Thank you. Yes. I love that frame of it.
I mean, that's what it's not like you're saying, come to my event, you know, 7 days from now, there's going to be XYZ. You're saying, here's the cause and the mission that we're creating. Here's where I hope to see it go over the next 3 to 5 years.
And the more people who join this cause, and I make a pledge to anybody who does join, you know, initially for the first maybe even year, the only thing that I'll ask of you is to read the newsletters once a week. But later on, well, here's the promise I make. I will never ask anybody for anything that they don't want to do or they don't want to give.
It's a good promise.
And yeah, and my goal is that serving in this effort will be one of the most deeply satisfying, exciting things you've ever done. And I invite you to come along for the ride.
Well, I'm so glad you're doing it. I definitely want to continue to help you with it. And thank you for telling us about it, Mitzi.
Thank you for allowing me to.
We are going to thank our sponsor and come back for the imperfect action round. Every business needs a book, including yours. Visit freebusinessbookpublishingcourse.com today to learn the 7 steps to publish and promote your nonfiction lead and profit-generating business book in 8 weeks. Once again, that's freebusinessbookpublishingcourse.com. And we are back with the imperfect action round. Mitzi, are you ready to take imperfect action?
I'm totally ready for imperfect action. Bring it on.
I think you take it all the time, and it's a huge contributor to your success. That's why I named it this round. These are 60-second rapid-fire answers. I got a couple of questions. First one, what is the fastest path to the profits?
Gosh, why the fastest path to the profits? A good reputation.
All right. Number 2, what is the biggest problem you see your prospects making and the fastest way for them to fix it?
Okay, the biggest profit. Okay, so my prospects in this case are people listening to us because I want them to be part of Win This Fight. Inertia. How do I get you to leap over and just do it? And the answer to getting over the inertia, you'll be so glad you did. For the rest of your life, you're going to be glad you did. Do it. WTF, text that to 51555. You're going to be so glad.
All right. Number 3, what is the best way to maximize customer lifetime value?
Okay, I've got examples from both my late father and my late husband. Just be so consumer centric. I mean, I felt that Frank Perdue's attitude, which I endorse, and it will be my answer to the question, he fawned over his customers.
Excellent. I knew you'd nail that. I asked that to everyone, and some of them were, I usually get, wow, that's a great question. I'm so excited because I'm the one who came up with it, and I just knew you'd have a breeze with it because you exemplify it. Your dad, your late husband. I mean, it's so ingrained with everything you do.
Thank you.
That was an easy one for you, but all right. What books would you recommend to Expert Authority World?
It's an old one, but guess what? It influenced my life. It influenced my father. It influenced my late husband. I think it's just got the wisdom of the ages. It's Dale Carnegie, How to Win Friends and Influence People.
Great recommendation. One of my favorites.
And by the way, Father told me that he read it every 10 years.
Oh, I like that. You know, my dad was an inspiration also before he passed, and that was one of the first books. I still have his copy from the 80s, and it's one of the first self-help books I read early on in my teens.
And by the way, I'm a total self-help book addict. I don't think 2 months goes by without my reading a self-help book.
That's good advice right there because, you know, more people need to read across the board. And if you are leaders or readers, and if you are reading, read more. It's only better. So, Mitzi, where would you like people to learn more about you?
No, that's really easy. WinThisFight.org.
And what's the text?
The text, oh, yes. If you want to get hold of me by texting WTF, and I do know what it means, WTF to 51555.
Mitzi, I have thoroughly enjoyed this, and I thank you for your time.
I can't believe I've had such a good time with you and with our audience. Thank you.
All right, Expert Authority World, we have another great episode here today. I'll see you tomorrow. Have a great day, and God bless.